A snowstorm could kill you before sunrise, not because ancient humans were weak, not because they didn't know how to fight, but because, in a blizzard, one bad decision could be enough. Walk in the wrong direction, and the landscape disappears behind a wall of white. Lose your shelter, and the wind begins stealing your body heat. Let the fire die, and suddenly the cold is no longer outside. It's everywhere. There were no weather apps, no emergency alerts, no heated houses, no rescue teams coming to find you. Just you, your family, and a frozen wilderness that could become deadly within minutes. So how did ancient humans survive the brutal winters of the Ice Age? The surprising answer is that they didn't survive by becoming stronger than the cold. They survived by becoming smarter than it. And the evidence suggests that their greatest weapons weren't just fire and fur. They were preparation, technology, cooperation, and knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Thousands of years ago, winter wasn't a season you could simply wait out in a comfortable house. For humans living in cold environments, winter could completely transform the world. Plants disappeared beneath snow. Water froze. Animals became harder to track. And a familiar landscape could suddenly become almost impossible to navigate. If a powerful snowstorm arrived, there was no checking tomorrow's forecast and deciding to stay home. You were already there, and sometimes your home was a temporary shelter made from whatever the environment could provide. Wood, branches, animal hides, bones, and, in some environments, even snow. But this is where humans had an extraordinary advantage. We could prepare for a problem before it arrived. And that preparation may have started long before the first snowflake fell. The human body is surprisingly vulnerable to extreme cold. Unlike many Arctic animals, we don't have a thick layer of fur protecting our entire bodies. We can't simply walk into a blizzard and rely on natural insulation. So our ancestors had to create their own. One of the most important technologies was clothing. Archaeological discoveries of specialized bone tools suggest that prehistoric humans were processing animal hides and creating increasingly sophisticated clothing and other equipment. Researchers, including archaeologist Ian Gilligan, have studied the role of clothing in human adaptation to cold climates, arguing that clothing technology was an important part of humanity's expansion into colder environments. And here's what makes this fascinating. Ancient clothing wasn't necessarily just a piece of animal skin thrown over the shoulders. It had to work. A poorly fitted hide could leave gaps where cold air entered, but carefully designed clothing could create layers of trapped air around the body. Fur could provide insulation. Animal hides could help block wind, and multiple layers could protect the body from freezing temperatures. In a way, ancient humans had created something remarkably similar to a primitive winter jacket, except there were no factories, no synthetic fibers, no zippers, just animal materials, stone and bone tools, sinew, and thousands of years of experimentation. And then archaeology gives us an incredible glimpse into just how sophisticated this technology could become. At Sungur, an Upper Paleolithic site in Russia, archaeologists uncover remarkable burials dating to roughly 30,000 years ago. The individuals were associated with thousands of carefully worked ivory beads. Those beads weren't simply random objects scattered around the bodies. Many were positioned in ways that suggest they had been attached to clothing. Think about the effort involved. Each bead had to be produced, prepared, and incorporated into clothing. This tells us something important. These people weren't simply trying to survive the cold from one day to the next. They were investing enormous amounts of time and skill into equipment that could help them live in an extremely demanding environment. Researchers such as Eric Trinkaus, who has studied the Sungur burials and Upper Paleolithic human populations, have helped scientists understand the significance of these discoveries. The exact function of every bead remains open to interpretation, but the overall picture is clear. These ancient humans possessed remarkable craftsmanship. They were making clothing and personal equipment with extraordinary attention to detail. They weren't just wearing the environment. They were engineering ways to survive it. But here's the problem. Even the best clothing in the world can't completely defeat a blizzard, because when the wind starts screaming, the cold becomes a different kind of enemy. A strong wind can rapidly increase heat loss from the body. Snow can destroy visibility. A hunter who travels too far from camp can lose a trail. A family caught in a whiteout can become separated. And once landmarks disappear, even a landscape you know well can become a maze. So ancient humans needed something more important than warm clothing. They needed somewhere the storm couldn't easily reach. They needed shelter. Don't fight it. Hide from it. Caves and rock shelters offered natural protection from wind and precipitation. Archaeologists have found evidence of repeated human occupation in caves and rock shelters across regions affected by Ice Age climates. But humans didn't always wait for nature to provide a ready-made home. They could build. They used branches, wood, animal hides, bones, and other materials available in their surroundings. This ability to transform local resources into shelter was one of humanity's greatest survival advantages. And there's a surprise in material that could sometimes help. Snow. To us, snow represents freezing temperatures. But packed snow also contains a large amount of trapped air. And air is a good insulator. That means a properly constructed snow shelter can be significantly warmer inside than the freezing air outside. Of course, we shouldn't assume every Ice Age human lived in an igloo. The famous igloo is associated with Inuit and other Arctic peoples and developed within specific Arctic cultural traditions. But the underlying principle is much broader. Humans learned to turn their environment into protection, and Ice Age archaeology gives us some extraordinary examples. At Mezherik, in what is now Ukraine, archaeologists uncover remains of large structures constructed using mammoth bones. Think about what that means. A mammoth wasn't simply an animal to hunt for meat. Its body could provide an enormous range of resources. Meat could provide food. Fat could provide valuable energy. Hide could be used for clothing or coverings. And the enormous bones could become building materials. One animal could contribute to nearly every part of survival. This is the difference between simply living in nature and learning how to engineer survival from nature. But even the strongest shelter had one major problem. It was still cold. And that's where fire became essential. Fire provided warmth. It provided light. It allowed people to cook food. And it could make a dark shelter feel like a place of safety. But maintaining a fire during a snowstorm was not easy. Wind could extinguish flames. Snow could make fuel wet. And wet wood is difficult to burn. So survival required planning. People needed dry fuel. They needed protection from wind. And they needed to keep the fire burning for as long as possible. But there was another danger. Smoke. A shelter with poor ventilation could become filled with smoke. But if the shelter was too open, valuable heat could escape. So humans had to find a balance. Warm enough to survive. Ventilated enough to breathe. Protected enough to keep the fire alive. This wasn't something one person could necessarily figure out instantly. It was knowledge built over generations. A mistake could teach a lesson. A successful shelter could become a model for the next one. And eventually, that knowledge could become tradition. But surviving a snowstorm wasn't only about staying warm, because you could have the best shelter. You could have a roaring fire. You could be protected from the wind, and still die of hunger. Cold weather creates another serious challenge. Finding food. Plants that were available during warmer months could disappear beneath snow. Animals could migrate. Tracks could become difficult to follow. And hunting during a blizzard could be extremely dangerous. So ancient humans needed more than hunting skill. They needed planning. If hunters successfully brought down a large animal, the group had a powerful opportunity. Meat could provide immediate food. Fat could provide concentrated energy. Hides could become clothing or shelter materials. Bones could become tools or building materials. And depending on the environment and preservation methods, some food could potentially be dried, smoked, or preserved by freezing conditions. For humans living in extreme cold, calories were not simply about avoiding hunger. They were fuel. The body uses energy to maintain its core temperature. And when the environment becomes colder, staying warm becomes more demanding. So a well-fed person had a major advantage over someone already weakened by hunger. In the harshest environments, food wasn't just dinner. Food was survival equipment. But perhaps the most powerful survival technology wasn't something you could hold in your hands. It was cooperation. A snowstorm doesn't care if you're the strongest hunter in the group. If you're injured, someone has to help you. If you're a child, someone has to protect you. If you're elderly, someone may need to provide food. And if you're caught outside in a blizzard, you may need someone to bring you home. Humans survived extreme environments partly because we are exceptionally social animals. Anthropologists have long studied how cooperation, food sharing, and social bonds influence human survival. Researchers such as Sarah Blaffer at RDY have emphasized the importance of cooperative caregiving in human evolution, while anthropological work on hunter-gatherer societies has shown how sharing and collective support can help communities survive unpredictable conditions. The exact details of Ice Age social life are difficult to reconstruct, but the archaeological record gives us clues that cooperation was important. Some ancient individuals survived serious injuries and illnesses that would have made independent survival extremely difficult. Their survival suggests that other people may have helped care for them. And that changes the way we think about ancient humans. They weren't just individuals fighting against nature. They were communities, families, groups, people who depended on one another. Because when the environment becomes dangerous enough, your neighbor's survival can become your survival. Think about what happens during a modern disaster. Power goes out, roads close, food becomes scarce. People begin checking on family members and neighbors. Why? Because humans understand something at a deep level. A crisis is easier to survive together. Ancient humans may have lived by the same basic principle. One person gathers wood, another protects the fire, another prepares food, another repairs clothing. Someone watches the children, someone cares for the injured, and everyone benefits. The fire isn't just yours. The shelter isn't just mine. It's ours. That simple idea may have been one of humanity's greatest survival advantages. Now the real challenge begins. What happens when the storm doesn't last one night? What if it continues for days? That's when preparation becomes everything. Inside a shelter, humans would have to depend on what they had already gathered. Fuel, food, water, clothing, shelter, and each other. There would be no reason to waste precious energy wandering outside in dangerous conditions. The group would stay close. The fire would be maintained. Food would be carefully managed. And everyone would wait. Outside, the storm could rage for hours, maybe days. Inside, the goal was simple. Stay alive until the world becomes safe again. And here's something that sounds almost strange today. Sometimes the smartest survival decision is to do absolutely nothing. Don't travel. Don't hunt. Don't take unnecessary risks. To stay inside. Wait. Conserve energy. Protect the fire. And survive. But preparation wasn't only about objects. It was also about knowing the landscape. Ancient humans learned where caves could provide shelter, which valleys were protected from strong winds, where water could be found, where animals traveled during winter, and perhaps most importantly, when not to move, because a blizzard can erase the world around you. Paths disappear. Landmarks vanish. The horizon becomes white. A person can walk for hours and believe they're going in the right direction, while slowly moving farther away from safety. So sometimes the greatest survival skill wasn't courage. It was judgment, knowing when to stop, knowing when to turn back, knowing when the storm was simply too dangerous. That knowledge could be passed from experienced adults to younger generations. A child might learn where to find shelter, how to recognize dangerous weather, how to protect a fire, how to follow animal tracks, how to navigate familiar terrain. And eventually, that child would teach someone else. Knowledge became a survival technology that could reproduce itself. Researchers such as paleoanthropologist Jean-Jacques Hublin have studied Neanderthal populations and the challenges faced by humans living through dramatic climatic changes. Neanderthals occupied parts of Europe and Western Asia during periods of severe environmental fluctuation. They weren't living in one permanently frozen world. The climate changed, habitats shifted, resources moved, and humans had to adapt repeatedly. This is important because surviving the Ice Age didn't require humans to evolve into polar bears. We didn't grow thick fur. We didn't develop enormous bodies covered in insulation. Instead, we changed our behavior. We made clothing. We built shelters. We controlled fire. We developed tools. We stored resources. We cooperated. And we learned. Then, we taught the next generation. That may have been the real secret. Not physical strength. Not one magical invention, but the ability to accumulate knowledge. So, how did ancient humans survive snowstorms? They didn't defeat winter with a single invention. They survived through a system. Clothing protected their bodies. Shelters protected them from wind and snow. Fire provided warmth, light, and cooked food. Calories gave their bodies energy to fight the cold. Technology allowed them to transform natural materials into tools for survival. Knowledge helped them understand when to move and when to stay still. And perhaps most importantly, cooperation kept individuals alive. A person alone in a blizzard is vulnerable. A group with knowledge, shelter, food, fire, and trust is something completely different. So the next time you watch snow falling outside your window, remember this. For us, a snowstorm might mean staying inside for a day. For our ancient ancestors, the same storm could mean life or death. They had no weather apps, no insulated modern jackets, no heated houses, no rescue helicopters. But they had something else. They had the ability to look at a dangerous world and figure out how to survive it. They learned how to turn animal skins into clothing, bones into shelters, wood into fire, food into energy, and strangers into allies. They didn't become stronger than nature. They became better at adapting to it. And perhaps that's why humans were able to survive in environments that seemed impossible, because the greatest survival tool wasn't the fire, it wasn't the shelter, it wasn't even the clothing. It was a human mind and the people standing beside it. The storm would eventually pass, the snow would melt, and the survivors would step outside again. Then they would teach their children what they had learned, and those children would teach theirs. Generation after generation, winter after winter, storm after storm, the knowledge survived. And because that knowledge survived, so did we.